Thank you so much, Dr. Corey, for inviting me and to be a part of this colloquium. It is so exciting to have an opportunity about talking about courageous leadership. This is a topic that I discuss often with our students here at Olivet. I had the opportunity not only to be the Chief Inclusion Officer of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, but I'm also a full professor. And I teach courses, and I teach specifically courses in inequality and race, as well as practicum. And in all these fields, it's important that our students know and understand how to create a space in which everyone can be their authentic self. So really excited about having a discussion about creating courage, because this is the very first step to building safe and brave spaces so people can openly be themselves. And we can all have the kind of discussions that we tend to leave to with just special groups. So glad you're here. And if you want to chip in, and it's going to be a very interactive session, so I encourage you to put things in the chat and give some thought about what we're discussing today. And this is my first time here. I got to get this mouse. I'm probably going to have Kelly help me with the mouse to get it.
Well,
Is this a touch screen?
It doesn't have to move. It is a touch screen.
Oh, can I just touch it?
You can just touch it.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'm just going to touch the screen and not use the mouse. So when you see me reaching, you know exactly what I'm doing. So today we're going to explore how can leaders create spaces where people can feel safe, where people can take risks, how we can connect across our differences and share bold ideas, and feeling comfortable sharing those bold ideas. This session is interactive, and having said it's interactive, I want you to only talk about what you're comfortable talking about. I may ask you to share something in the chat. Don't feel like you're obligated to do that. I want to meet you where you are right now, so don't feel obligated that you have to do that. I want you to share where you are right now. Okay, we will explore how to foster brave environments, courageous environments, and how to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I come to you from my diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging lens, and that is how we will start our conversation. We're going to explore how relationship building and lived experiences can help foster the kind of environment that you want to belong in, that you want to welcome others into, an environment where people are free to have these challenging discussions without fear that they will be judged and double judged based upon what they're sharing with you. And that's because we're talking about lived experiences. There is absolutely no falsehood to your lived experiences. Based on your lived experience, no one can tell you that you're right or no one can tell you that you're wrong, because it is what it is. It is your lived experiences. And it is through these lived experiences that we will be able to build relationships and create environments that encourage courageous conversations. It is our hope that after this session as leaders, you will feel empowered to cultivate courageous, inclusive spaces where everyone can thrive and be their authentic self. We're going to use 4 approaches as we move forward today. 1, building community with the environment you want to impact. What environment? Ask yourself, what environment do you want to impact? Are you doing this for work? Are you doing this for your family? Is this a community project? What community, what environment do you want to build this courageous space in? Second, we're going to look at safe space to courageous space. We're going to talk about how it's important to have a safe space, but it's also important to have a brave space as well. Then we're going to talk about storytelling. The most fun part of this entire presentation for me is the storytelling component, because storytelling is a powerful tool in creating courageous spaces. And finally, we're going to talk about courageous conversation compass, and that's a tool that people use to discuss courageous conversations based upon when they enter a conversation. I do have the references listed in this PowerPoint, and I'm going to ask Kelly to send this to you all so you can have it as well. We won't go over it today, except to say the one reference I use is from the National Museum. I'm going to go back so you can see that. The one reference that I'm going to reference all the time is the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And they have a whole section on community building. And it's an excellent session, one in which we here at the University of Olivet in the leadership group of the President's Cabinet, we actually went through this entire building community program that's offered there at the National Museum of African American History and the building community section. We went through that whole section together, and it was a rewarding experience for all of us. And interestingly, we did it during the time when the George Floyd episode that happened in our country just happened to roll around that very same time. I encourage you on your own to take a look at that site and to get to know it, because it links to all other wonderful things as it relates to DEIB. So the community building with the environment you want to impact. The first thing I want you to consider is each other's lives and experiences and perspectives that we have and we have experienced. Allow a community to be not only about what we have in common, but what makes us different. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat in a any kind of conversation, race, ethnicity, differences of opinion on anything. When people are involved in these kinds of conversations, oftentimes people look for what makes them different. What's so different about each other, and not what you have in common, what is familiar, what is similar to each other. But as we go through this process today of building courageous spaces, I want you to know that it's okay to think about what you have in common with somebody. What are your similarities? Take that away with you as you interact with people within your corporate sectors or on your campuses or in your community. Just think not so much about what makes us different, but what makes us similar. You know, we're living in a world today even within our own government or political structure, we look at things that make us different, and we hear all kinds of outrageous statements about what makes us different. I encourage you to look at things that also make us very similar. I'm going to quote the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and he said, "Far too often, people think of themselves as just individuals, separated from one another, whereas you are connected, and what you do affects the whole world. When you do well, it spreads out. It is for the whole of humanity." We are all interconnected. I received my Ph.D. in the field of human ecology. And in the field of human ecology, we talk about how we're connected. And I remember this entire matrix of how that showed how we were all interconnected and everything is interrelated. And so Desmond Tutu's quote resonates with me, because we are all affected, and what you do affects the entire world. Isn't that a powerful statement? Do you ever think that the one thing that you do will affect the entire world? We're all interconnected. So our actions make a difference, not only for yourself, not only for your family, not only for your community, but for the entire world. In other words, and I put my own pronunciation on this word, Ubuntu. It is a South African philosophy, A person is a person through other persons. In other words, humanity to others. We are all interconnected. Humanity is based upon how we relate to one another. But humanity comes first in building relationships. Now let's take a moment and talk about safe space. From safe space to courageous, brave spaces. Let's take a moment and talk about that. Just think about that title, Safe Space to Courageous, Brave Spaces. Now, I'm going to condition this for you a little bit because I'm going to say some things that some folks may be uncomfortable with, but we'll get through it, okay? From safe spaces to courageous spaces. Conversations about identity and equity are essential to courageous community building. It's called equity work. And I can tell you, when we talk about equity work, it really doesn't matter what type of equity work we're talking about. I know I'm coming from a DEIB lens, but it could be equity work in any area. It takes courage to build communities to have this kind of conversation about identity and equity. The word identity, what does that mean to you? Are we talking about your identity? Are we talking about the identity of the person you're talking with? Or are we talking about the identity of the organization or space in which you want to build community? I think we're talking about all those things when we begin to have conversations, when we begin to think about how we can safely have these conversations. Equity work is essential. Oftentimes, for people who identify as white, and please take no offense here, this is just me having a courageous conversation with you. Oftentimes, for people who identify as white, safety is often confused with comfort. In order to feel safe, one must feel comfortable. And without that comfortable feeling, then one does not feel safe. Think about that. I want you to think about your own experiences. I want you to think about the times in which you had these kinds of conversations. And did you feel safe? Or did you feel threatened because the conversation was introduced? Because oftentimes, safety is confused with comfort. I can tell you now, in all the years that I have had courageous conversations in the nature of my work over the years, I've had to have courageous conversations. And I can tell you that when we talk about race or any other highly sensitive matter, it may be uncomfortable. It may be uncomfortable. Yet, it is at the edge of your discomfort, at the edge of your anxiety, talking about something like this, at the edge of your anxiousness, is where we learn the most about ourselves and those that we're wanting to build a community with. So it may not feel safe. It may not feel safe. But I'm going to quote Dr. Stephen Corey, the president of our institution, and he often says, get comfortable being uncomfortable. One has to become comfortable being uncomfortable. Isn't that a new level of comfort that we are really not used to even thinking about? How often do we think about getting comfortable being uncomfortable? What do we do on the opposite end of that? Because we all like to stay in the spaces that we're comfortable in, we oftentimes push back and fight against that change, fight against having conversations, fight against even acknowledging that the situation exists, that a situation exists, or that there needs to be a conversation about something, because we want to stay in that comfortable space that we're in. If we stay there, we will never be able to build, as leaders, we will never be able to build a kind of an environment that allows individuals to freely have to freely discuss matters within your organization, the freedom to be their true selves, their genuine selves. I can tell you from my own experiences in certain spaces where I have worked before, when topics have come up, and I simply didn't say anything. I simply didn't say anything because I did not think that the people I was sharing that space with were ready to receive what I have to say. I can honestly tell you here at the University of Olivet, I have taken the risk and shared where I am in certain spaces, and it has been received and accepted. Haven't been judged or treated any differently for having these kind of conversations. But interestingly, as we talk about how difficult it is for those who identify as white, often confusing safety with comfort, on the flip side of that, we can talk about the challenges that people of color may have. But before we talk about that, by moving from safe space to brave space, we rise to the challenge of having honest conversations that lead to more of an equitable society, more equitable for us all. Now, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to talk about whiteness. People don't talk about whiteness. When we talk about race, what do we talk about? Put it in the chat. When you're talking about race, what groups of people do we normally mention when we're talking about matters related to race? Can I see the chat? If you're here and you're able to, just put it in the chat. Okay. When we talk about different racial ethnic groups, what group is normally mentioned? Come on, be brave. Just put it in the chat. No judgment zone here. I promise I will not judge you. Okay, so right now we don't have anyone putting comments in the chat, but I'm going to answer this question for you. I'm going to share what my students have shared with me in the past. When we talk about race, we oftentimes mention people of color, races other than white. Thank you, Matthew. Matthew Rose, thank you. We oftentimes talk about other than white. We don't talk, that's what our students say. When I ask my students every year in each class, I ask my students, when we talk about race and ethnicity, we never talk about anything white. We don't talk about whiteness. And whiteness is a real thing. And if you don't believe me, just after this is over, or even while I'm sitting here talking, just go on the internet and punch in whiteness and it's going to pop up. It's a real thing. So we don't talk about whiteness. We never talk about what it means to be white. And oftentimes I think that's where we lose a lot of people when we talk about race and ethnicity, because we're going to talk about races other than white. And that white person is feeling like, well, when we talk about race and ethnicity, it really doesn't apply to me. It applies to all those other people because we never talk about it. And I'm going to ask you another question, be ready in the chat. And if we do talk about things related to white, what tone or what ways in which white people are mentioned when we talk about race, ethnicity, inclusion, and belonging? What ways? What are some terms or what ways are used? And I'm asking you this question. And I realize for some of you, it's stunning. because nobody ever asked you this question before. You would know, never once were your feelings or what you were going through was considered when we talk about race, ethnicity, and inclusion. So oftentimes, when we talk about these matters, whiteness isn't considered. What it's like for a white person engaging in these activities, engaging in these conversations. But I want you to know that when we talk about identity and equity, everybody's included. Everyone's included. Because, being white is something that everybody wasn't at the beginning of our society. At the beginning of our society, those who came in and colonialized our country were considered white. And others who came in later were not, such as those who are Italian or Irish. They were sort of, I'm going to use this term, it's not really the right term, but so don't take offense. But they were added into as white later on. And our census will verify that for you. Because if you look at the census early on, there was only 2 or 3 people listed, Black, white, Native American. And now when you look at it, it is full, it has a wide range of racial ethnic groups that a person can check off on a census box. So being white is not something that has always existed for all groups of people, and understanding whiteness is very important. So I'm going to ask you this question, and I need everybody to just sort of join in here a little bit. And I'm going to ask you this question. When did you first realize your race or your ethnicity? When did you first realize your race or your ethnicity? Think about that. I'm going to give you a moment to think about it. When we are building safe spaces for individuals and courageous spaces for individuals, for people of color, a racially mixed group is really a safe space, no matter what the intent of the participants. For most people of color, or for some people of color, they enter into these spaces not feeling safe, not knowing what to expect, no matter what the intent. So I want you to keep that in mind as you leave here and go out to create a brave and courageous space within your own communities. Oh, thank you so much, Kyle, for jumping in there. When I met one of my childhood best friends who was Black, that is like as long as I can remember, though, I'll always know him. This is when Kyle realized that he was of a different, Kyle, I don't know your ethnicity because you didn't mention it in here. And, but that's when he realized he was of a different ethnicity than his Black best friend. That's when he realized it. So out the gate, Kyle says he's white. Out the gate, none of us really think about race until we realize we are a certain ethnicity. So we all start off where race is not the number one thing that we consider in most households, okay? And so I'm going to ask you this question. Brave and courageous spaces require different kind of bravery for people of color than it does for whites. Tell me why. Why do you think that? Do you think that's true? Tell me if you think it's true. And if you think it's true, tell me why. And if you think it's not true, tell me why. And I need some courageous people to, like Kyle and Matthew, to jump in here and join our chat on this particular topic. Remember, you're just sharing your own experiences. There's no right or wrong here, and there's no judgment zone. Why? I'm going to venture to say it is because of the history of our country and how sometimes in certain spaces, thank you, Matthew, thank you. White is viewed as a benchmark That is so true, or norm to which all others are being compared. It takes different bravery because of this. Matthew, that is so true. I teach that in my race and ethnicity class. We just talked about this 2 weeks ago when we talked about how all things are measured based upon whiteness or white or being white. Thank you so much for that. And if you don't meet that standard, oftentimes you are judged, a person to judge, no matter how talented a person is of color. There is this standard of this unspoken norm or benchmark that you are never good enough. You're good. Can't deny you're good. I'll hire you because you're good. And in the past, over so many centuries, I'll even take your ideas because you're good. And I'll market them and make a fortune. You're good, but there's still this line that says you're just not good enough. And when a person speaks out against any injustice, our history in this country has proven to us that when a person speaks out about wanting to build an equitable environment for all, sometimes there's a price to pay, such as if you're in Tennessee and you get voted out of being a part of that house that you belong to, or the Senate. Or sometimes your life is at risk. Sometimes you get shot down in your driveway. Sometimes you get hung. So there are a lot of reasons why it takes a lot of courage for a person of color to share their ideas within a racially mixed group. So I commend all of you coming here together today to want to share or want to learn ways in which you can create an environment where people feel comfortable sharing ideas and being a part of building the community. And I'm taking my hat off to all of you who are dropping in the chat. I really appreciate that. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is storytelling. I got to tell you that storytelling is probably the most fun and exciting part about building spaces, building safe spaces, and moving away from just a safe space, which we're all so used to, and moving towards a brave space, courageous space, because it takes bravery to make courageous moves, right? It takes bravery to be courageous. And one of the ways we can do that is storytelling. I absolutely love storytelling. So I'm going to go back to ask you this question to share your story. And I asked you that some time ago. I'm just going to see if I can go back to that. What you share with me when you realized that you were of a certain ethnicity, and Matthew stepped up and shared his story. Now I'm going to share mine. I was a little girl, very young, and my parents had just integrated a all-white neighborhood. And we were the only Black people on that block. And I can tell you, that block was not ready for us. And when we went to school, there were several other people of color living in the community. When we went to school, there were some Blacks and there were Latinos there that I noticed. I didn't know the race and ethnicity of everyone there. I was a kid. But when I went to school, as I grew older, I realized that there was a mixed group of people. But when I moved over to that neighborhood, and my parents gave me a brand new bike. And my parents, it was 8 children and my mom and dad, so it was 10 of us. We lived in this big house on the block, and they'd given us all bicycles, and we hopped on the bike, and my parents said, don't go past the block. You can ride your bikes from block to block. And it was a long block, so it was exciting. So I hopped on that. It was a semi-rural area. So I hopped on that bike and I was riding my bike up and down the street, and my hair was flowing in the wind with my pigtails, and I was having my arms out wide and riding with no arms and just having a really, really great time. Enjoying myself as a kid, a little kid. Probably going into kindergarten. I think when we moved over there, I was going into kindergarten. So one day I was riding my bike. I had no reason to be concerned about anything. And I was riding my bike. And one of the neighbors came outside. And they said, "In, go home." Ride my bike. I didn't even know what "in" meant. I'm riding my bike, but they said it in a way that sort of caught my attention. So I'm riding my bike. I had to pass their house to get to the end of the corner. So I turn around and come back to go back to the other corner. And a couple of kids came out and they said, "In, told you to go home." Around like, who are they talking to? What is this "in" thing they're talking about? So I'm riding my bike. And so then I stop in front of my house because my brothers were out there. And I said, those boys down there kept saying "in, go home." These are my older brothers. I was younger than all my brothers. And I said, they're like 7 years older than me or something like that, right? 7, 5, 6 years, well, maybe 1 year older than me. So apparently they knew what that meant. So they went down the street to the boys' house and confusion broke out. So I didn't know what to do. I said, something's not right here with this "in" thing that guy called me. So I went and told my dad. And I said, "Dad, those guys down there told me "in, go home." And now Tommy, Ned, and Larry are down there talking to them, and they're like fussing, they're arguing, and blah, blah. So my dad goes down there, and my dad then talks to the boy's father, and then they have a conversation. And then we come back home, and of course, my dad took me off my bikes for the day, which I wasn't happy about, but I had to get off that bike. But then he sat down and explained to me what the "N" word was. I never knew what the "N" word was. It didn't make a difference to me. I was having fun, enjoying my neighborhood and enjoying my environment, which I felt very safe in. And now I realize that I live in a duplistic world. I realize that I live in a world in which I am a Black person. And at that time, when we were growing up, we didn't use the word Black. We used the word Negro. Now I'm giving my age out. You know what year we were using the word Negro, but we were using the word Negro. And so it was during that time that I realized I lived in a duplistic world, and that there were some people who didn't like people who were Negro, or now I'm going to change that to Black. There were some people who didn't like people who were Black, and that there were some places in which we were not welcome. That's my story. That's my courageous story that I have. And I encourage you to think about your story. What story do you have? And Matthew did, and I thank you so much for that, Matthew, because storytelling is very important. And you can build a courageous community by just telling your story, because stories are primal. It is something that has always been a way in which we communicate. It's a way in which we connect with one another through stories and how we collaborate with one another. And it brings meaning. The meaning you have in your life right now is because of the stories that has been provided to you. The reason you have the order that you have in your life right now is because of the order that has been given to you at some time or another through storytelling. And it is that of empathy. And I'm going to close out by saying that storytelling is a powerful, oh, wait, I went the wrong way. So I want to talk real quickly about Courageous Conversation Compass. And this is a way that this was developed for educators to be used in terms of how to and it identifies how people enter into conversations. And if you know how a person enters into a conversation, you will know better how to communicate with them. They may enter it emotionally, intellectually, morally, or socially. But at some point, people enter into conversations like this. If a person has a racial issue that has a physical level to it, and they have sensations of anger and sadness, intellectually, person may be considering just data. Morally, people look at right or wrong, and socially, we really look at the racial behaviors and actions. And I'm telling you that when you share your story, no matter where you enter a conversation, emotionally, intellectually, or morally, when you share your story, it's no right or wrong, and it is a way in which you can begin to have courageous conversations by just sharing your story. So thank you for having me today. I don't think we have much time for questions. I'm going to defer to Kelly right now.
You've got 3 minutes.
I have 3 minutes for questions. Does anyone have questions? No? No questions?
While we're waiting for questions, how about if I suggest that if people do have questions or they pop up later when you're out for a walk or you're doing the dishes or whatever you're doing, if you have questions or if you want to continue the conversation, we have our leadership learning community in Canvas. And it has a discussion forum that is focused on this particular topic in this particular session. And so you can go into the LDR 900 course. Anyone with a student ID, anyone who can get into Canvas can get into it. You don't have to take a class. You won't get a grade. But if you want to ask more questions, Dr. Logan can get into that as well. And so she may check it in the next couple of days, see if there's anyone who wants to keep talking or start talking or process some of these ideas that she shared. We hope that you will use that as a resource. And while you're in there, we have tons of leadership building resources and toolboxes for courageous leadership. That's a resource for you. And we're going to continue to add things to it. And so we hope you'll take advantage of that. Dr. Logan, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It was so much fun.
Yeah, great conversation, and it really helps us to frame how we need to think and how we need to feel in order to move ourselves forward and move our communities forward.
Yeah.
Appreciate you very much.
Good being here. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.